Hey guys, this is Keir from Strength Coach Network. Gonna do about a 10-minute video today on transfer of training in sport because I think it is one of the most important and yet misunderstood topics amongst people within our profession. And if you can understand this phenomenon and use it to your advantage in your training with your athletes, it's going to be a lot more productive in the long run, keep your athletes healthy, and more importantly improving throughout the duration of their career. So first things first, what is transfer? Transfer is basically what we're paid to do as coaches. That is, we train a variety of different exercises and we improve in those exercises with the hope and the assumption that it is going to transfer to improve performance on the field or on the court or wherever that athlete's sport is played. And obviously it should stand to reason that depending on what sport or action or event it is you're training to improve, not all exercises are going to be created equal in the degree to which they transfer to improve performance on the field. So if we use like a really basic example, you can infer that a lower body exercise like a barbell back squat is going to have more transfer to jumping than, for example, a bicep curl. And a second factor, which is much harder to get your head around and much more frustrating for us as coaches, is what constitutes an effective and appropriate exercise that moves the needle in one stage of the athlete's career can be the complete opposite at another time in the athlete's career. And a useful analogy to imagine this, I'm going to steal from J.B. Marin, and that is to imagine your athlete's trainability as a tube of toothpaste. So when the tube of toothpaste is new, you take the cap off, you can push in any direction, as light or as gentle as you like. In any direction, toothpaste is going to come flying out at the end. Yet, the older that tube of toothpaste is, the harder you have to push in a more specific direction to get the same quantity of toothpaste to come out at the end. The same is true of transfer. When athletes are very new to training, they are not yet desensitized to the stimulus of training, anything is going to work, anything is going to transfer, regardless of how specific an exercise is to their event, their sport, their action. And we'll talk about the criteria for that later. Conversely, the longer they've been training, the more desensitized they are to the stimulus of training, the more specific we have to be in the selection of training activities that we do if we are going to see positive transfer, i.e. improved performance in the sport, the action, or the event. And as a consequence, there are a couple of powerful implications once you understand the relationship between training age and transfer to the sport or the event. The first is, if general exercises will get the job done early in the athlete's career, you should lean as heavily on these as you can to keep the ace of specific exercises up your sleeve. If you play them too early, to steal a phrase from Natalie Bondarchuk, you're going to rob the athlete twice. Once because you've exposed them to an athlete that they have not earned the right to use, and twice because when you do need it, they're already desensitized to that activity. And of course, everything that we do, regardless of what it is, how intense it is, it has a limited shelf life. It is eventually going to stop working. On the flip side, if you are working with athletes of a high training age, they're experienced trainees, if you are working in general exercises of insufficient intensity or volume or frequency, you're actually going to get no positive transfer. You're not going to see any further improvement in the sport or the event, but you are going to create a whole lot of fatigue. And of course, if we are going to pay the price of fatigue, we want to get the benefit of improved performance. So make sure you're not wasting your time in that regard if you work with high-level athletes. So throughout the athlete's career, there needs to be a gradual and progressive transition from a wider variety of more general exercises performed with less intensity early in the athlete's career to build the kind of physical and technical foundation that allows for the development of a high peak. So just like a pyramid in real life, the wider the base, the higher the peak. But once that has ceased to be productive and ceases to transfer to the sport or the event, we have to then chase specificity and intensity at the expense of volume and general exercise. So there has to be a shift in what we're doing and how we're doing it as the athlete stops responding. So what exactly makes an exercise more or less specific? It isn't just how similar it looks. Avoid this trap, the so-called simulation rather than specificity. If you want the full list, I'd advise you to look at the criteria of dynamic correspondence by Professor Yuri Verkhoshansky. And it basically goes like this. Look at the sport, the event, the action that you're trying to improve performance in. Ask yourself, what are the muscles used? What's the magnitude and direction of force? What's the range of motion? Where within that range of motion is peak force produced? What is the contact time available? The angular velocity of the segments involved? The contraction type and the energy system being used? And of course, the greater the degree of similarity, according to this list, shared between the training exercise and the sport, or what's called the competition exercise, the more specific it is. And the fewer criteria it shares, the more general it can be considered. So now that you've got that information, what do you do with it and how do you use it to organize what you're going to do and when within the training process? And to facilitate that, I'd recommend you steal from another Soviet, this time Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk, who is probably the most successful throws coach of all time, and came up with a super user-friendly classification system for exercises for the throws, but we can adapt it for our purposes. So naturally, the most specific thing you can do is to play the sport itself. So you can group in here playing the sport itself or any variation thereof. So adding load, taking load away, performing chunks of the event in isolation, these would all come under what is known as the competition exercise and should be considered the most specific. So exercises which don't fall into the category of competition exercise but still share a large number of criteria from the list of dynamic correspondence and are trained with high intensity would be termed specialized developmental exercises, i.e. they develop the specific physical and technical qualities that are most strongly correlated with performance in the sport or the event. If we go a level below that and we select exercises which share slightly fewer criteria from the list of dynamic correspondence, or they are trained with less intensity, they serve to prepare the athlete for specialized developmental exercises. So it's in the name, specialized preparatory exercises. These can be considered more of a transition from general exercises, which we'll talk about next, and those most intense, most specific exercises which come in specialized developmental. And then of course we have the general exercises. These are going to be the exercises that share the least amount of dynamic correspondence to the sport or the event, and mostly just serve to lay the foundation of the physical or technical qualities that will be built upon with specialized preparatory and specialized developmental exercises. And if we go back to the toothpaste analogy, these are going to be the exercises which we stagnate with earliest in the athlete's career with regard to their transfer to the action or sport or event that we are trying to improve in training. Now, it doesn't mean that you should stop training these with your athletes when they cease to transfer to the sport. It just means that you can't rely on them exclusively and expect improved performance. There's still utility, there's still value, but the reason that you're going to do them is probably going to change. So what are the implications or next steps in adopting this model? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to establish what it is you're trying to train to improve because that is going to be your reference point that you then classify, what's a specific exercise, what's a general exercise thereafter. If you are fortunate enough to work in a so-called stopwatch sport like throwing, jumping, running, weightlifting, where you can precisely measure the outcome and the performance of your athlete, that is going to be the thing that you're training to improve. It gets a little bit trickier where the field sports are concerned, because there is so much that we have to prepare our athletes for, and we can fall into the trap of trying to be specific and try to improve everything. And of course, it's kind of like paraphrasing from marketing, where if your product is for everyone, your product is for no one. If you're specializing for everything, you're specializing for nothing. And of course, field sport athletes are normally excellent or world-class at one or two things. They're very, very good at a few other things, and they're just okay at the rest. So if you're a field sport athlete, or if you work with field sport athletes, you need to ask yourself the following questions. What are the actions that you perform most frequently within the context of your sport or your position? What's the stuff that fatigues you the most? Or what is the stuff that is most consequential to the outcome of the game or your performance within the context of your position? And the answer to these questions is probably going to be the two, or at most the three things that you need to focus on as your specific goals within your program. And for field sport athletes, it's typically going to be sprinting and something else, and that something else is going to depend on your evaluation of the sport. Next, go ahead and take a look at the multitude of training activities that you are performing with your athletes with the intent of improving their performance in their sport, their event, their position. And using the work of Dr. Verkhoshansky, Dr. Bondarchuk, try and classify what you're doing. Ask yourself, what category would this exercise fall into? Is it a competition exercise? Is it specialized developmental, specialized preparatory, or is it general in nature? And ask yourself, is there a clear trend or progression from higher volumes of general exercises early in your athletes' careers or early in the yearly preparation, with a trend towards progressively more intense and more specific training activities as the athlete's career and the training year goes on? And if the answer to those questions is no, some athletes, at least some of the time, are getting shortchanged, and that may manifest itself in stagnated performance, or at worst, a higher risk of injury. Likewise, do you have established key performance indicators or metrics that you are using to infer when it's the correct time in an athlete's career or the training year to progress to a more specific exercise, i.e. general exercises have ceased to transfer to what it is you're trying to improve? It's quite important to have this process mapped out ahead of time, otherwise we're just making it up as we go along. Now, it can be quite a mentally daunting process to go through all these steps, but I really do think it is one of the keys to unlocking consistent, predictable, and most importantly, career-long improvement in your athlete's performance, and avoiding a lot of the stagnation that plagues so many programs where athletes come in, they get great results in the first couple of years, and then things stop improving. And of course, what we've just talked about in the last 10 minutes or so is mostly the jumping off point, just to get you thinking about the topic of transfer and training. And if you'd like to learn more about these topics, we actually have presentations within Strength Coach Network by Dr. Bondarchuk and Natalia Verkhoshansky, who is Yuri's daughter. She is a PhD in her own right and widely considered to be the person that has pushed and advanced Yuri Verkhoshansky's work the most. So if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment if you would like to ask a question or share your thoughts with us. Thanks.